Week 2 of Pink Party is a survivor story, and a special survivor story. I'm joined with Jeff Osborne. He's here with us, and a lot of people out there, as we talked last week in our introductory video, when you think breast cancer awareness, you think it only affects women, but there's so many men every year affected by this. Jeff is one of those survivors. Jeff, tell us a little bit about how your story started and kind of take us through from the beginning.
So back in December of 2014, I was at home one evening and I was walking through the house and I accidentally bumped the door. And when I bumped the door with my chest, it kind of hurt a little bit. And I started feeling around on my chest and noticed that I had a little bump just right to the left of on my left breast. And I kind of went through there and then kind of noticed it was pretty tender. So I told my wife about it. And she insisted that I go get it checked out. And of course, me being a male, I didn't want to. I put it off and put it off and put it off, and finally after about 3 weeks we went and got it checked out. So my doctor told me not to worry about it. It was just a little fatty tissue that was common in teenage boys going through puberty and males 50 and older. So he gave me a prescription to take and said it should go away in 2 weeks, and if it didn't, to call him back. So I took the prescription. After 2 weeks, the bump was still there, still tender. So I called him back. He said, well, maybe we need to do the next step, which was go get a ultrasound. So we went and got an ultrasound. So I asked the technician in ultrasound, I said, what are you looking for? And he said, I'm looking to see if it's fluid-filled or hard. And I asked him, I said, well, what is it? And he said, it's hard. I said, okay. So we waited another 2 weeks for the results. The results come back. They said it was a fluid-filled abscess, not to worry about it. So another 2 weeks went by. It's still there, so I called my doctor back. He says, well, maybe we need to go to the next step, so let's go ahead and do a biopsy of it. So about 2 more weeks passed. We did another biopsy in it. And the surgeon that did the biopsy told me everything looked normal, not to worry about it. Matter of fact, we did the biopsy on March 11th of 2015. And he was going to go on spring break with his family the next week. And he told me, he said, don't worry about it. He said, I'm going to go on spring break with my family. He said, when I get back, I'll call you in the office and give you the results. He said, but don't worry about it because there's nothing to worry about. I said, okay. So that was on Wednesday. So the Friday the 13th, March 13th, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he called me. He said, I need you to come to my office. I need to talk to you before I go on vacation. And I said, okay. So I knew then it wasn't good. So I went over there and he told me, he said, you've tested positive for breast cancer. And he said less than 3% of men get breast cancer. It's very rare that this happens. He said, but you do have breast cancer. Of course, when he said the word cancer, you're just kind of stunned. I didn't know what to think. My wife didn't know what to think. This is very, I never took even a prescription in my life. I'm not on any maintenance drugs. I was very healthy. And so anyway, I went through the process. I went to, told my personal doctor what happened, and I'd actually set up an appointment with a surgeon there in Seminole to go ahead and have my left breast removed. And my doctor said, well, I don't think that's a good idea. You need to go to OU Breast Institute. So I called up there, they made me an appointment. Went up there, and in April, got my breast removed, and I come to find out I tested positive for 3 types of cancers, which was very, very rare. I tested positive for invasive ductal carcinoma. I tested positive for Ki-67, which is a highly aggressive cancer, and I tested positive for HER2 positive cancer, which is another highly aggressive cancer. So, bottom line, if it wouldn't been for my wife urging me to go, possibility I may not be here today.
Yeah, and Jeff, when you're telling that story, I think about what you must have been thinking as your doctors are telling you each step of the way, hey, no, it's no big deal. You said it yourself. Guys, sometimes we're a little bit hesitant to ever think anything's seriously wrong, or maybe, well, let's just, and when you have doctors kind of backing that up, it's nothing big. Mm-hmm. Was there ever a time in those moments where you thought maybe this could be something bad, or?
I never thought there was anything going on until he called me on that Friday. And when he called me and said, I didn't see you before I go on vacation, that's when it hit that, hey, there may be something here.
And I think that's the important that's the important part of your story. Mm-hmm. I think is that hearing somebody that we would all be whenever you were telling it, I was thinking I would be doing the same thing. Yeah. And a little bit relaxed, and I'd probably have my wife has to push me to do a lot of things too. So I think it's so great that people out there hear this story and they hear you talking about the real life, situation, going through the uncertainty, and then hearing it from the doctors and everything like that. Now, since you've went through all that and everything, how are you doing now?
I'm doing good. I'm 5 years out. After I went and did my treatments, I had to do 6 of the what I call the rough treatments. There were 3 chemo drugs, and
Yeah.
I'd have to wait 3 weeks in between each treatment to let my body recover.
Yeah.
And then after I got those done, I had to do a year of maintenance chemo. And then after that, I've been on a pill to prevent. This is an estrogen-driven cancer, so I'm on a pill to prevent estrogen from feeding my hormones.
Okay.
So hopefully in March, I go back for my 5-year checkup. They'll release me.
I'm sure for survivors, their life is maybe cut into 2 halves. Before, surviving breast cancer, and then after surviving breast cancer. So I imagine it being somebody, like you said, less than 3%. People don't automatically go to men when they think about this. So what's it been like for you to guys, I guess, have you talked to other male survivors? Have you talked to other, when you talk to female survivors, what's it been like to just share your story and everything?
Well, I was very blessed. When I first got diagnosed, there was a lady in my church that had breast cancer, and I called her just to get some information from her, And she actually referred to me that a guy that lived in Wetumpka, that used to live in Wetumpka where I live, he had it years back. So she gave me his number, and I called him, and he had the exact same thing I did. So he was a great help in kind of telling me what to expect, what the process was. So that was really a blessing right there. Every time I would go to the doctor, I would hear the words rare, unique, unusual. And I made a joke with my doctor one time. I said, I've been trying to tell my wife for 30 years that I'm rare and unique, and she never would have believed me.
Absolutely.
But going through the process, it was tough. I'm a very family-oriented man. My grandson, my youngest grandson, his first birthday, we had his birthday party at my home, and I couldn't participate. I was on the 4th day of my chemo, which is when the symptoms really hit me hard. So I had to stay in my room because I just didn't have the energy to come out. So it really affected me in that way. But on the flip side, I'm just really a blessed man. God led me through this, and I'm a Christian, a strong faith, and I just it's kind of like a little kid walking through the wilderness. In the dark, you hang on to your daddy's hand. Not gonna let go. That's what I decided I was gonna do. I was gonna hang on to God's hand and let Him lead me through this, and He did. It was a rough go. It was rough to see my family hurting. Even though my body was physically hurting, deteriorating, it hurt me. It hurt my soul to see my family have to watch me suffer. I didn't like that. And when I was first diagnosed, we left the doctor's office. We went to a parking lot, pulled over, and we were both kind of upset and didn't know what to think. And I just told my wife, I said, we've got to pull it together. We've got to go home and tell our children, hey, Dad's got cancer, but it's going to be all right. We're going to go through this process, and it's going to be all right. The shock to us was there's no history of breast cancer in my family. Absolutely none. And I'll never forget when they were wheeling me into the operating room to take my breast off, and the nurse asked me, said, Mr. Osborne, do you have high blood pressure? And I said, no, ma'am. And she said, are you diabetic? I said, no, ma'am. She said, do you have high cholesterol? I said, no, ma'am. She said, do you take any kind of medication? I said, no, ma'am. She said, what are you doing here? I said, that's a good question. I don't know. So, it can happen to anybody.
That's exactly right. And that's such a powerful part of your story as well, is that, for people out there, like you said, sometimes, 10 feet tall and bulletproof,
Mm-hmm.
and especially healthy folks, that don't ever have to go to the doctor or anything like that. I think the main point of Jeff's story is that, be diligent even when you're feeling well. Screenings, exams, everything like that. Our Muscogee Creek Nation Division of Health, our Department of Health, even this last week, introducing the latest technology to our facilities. The help is there, the support is there. We've got a great team. The Pink Party Committee is just a few folks, though, putting this together. That's part of a nationwide team here at the Muscogee Creek Nation as far as breast cancer awareness, or any kind of cancer awareness, really. But the resources are there. I think that's probably something that you would share as well, just part of the screening and getting regular checkups, things like that, even when you're feeling well.
One thing I think was really important is that our cancer doctor suggested that we do gene screening. Because if I had a certain gene, it would be passed down to my 2 daughters, and they would have to have breast exams every year.
Wow.
And they had an 80% chance of getting breast cancer. You know, thank the Lord I didn't have that gene, and it wasn't passed down to my daughters. But that's very important. I mean, you need to follow up with all your tests, everything your doctor says, because it's very important to do all that testing.
Yeah, and I early detection is so key with breast cancer, and really all kinds as well, but especially with this one. And like you said, knowing the gene awareness and things like that, and having that information, crucial. So thank you so much, Jeff, for being with us today, and not only inspiring folks with your story, but really reminding people with some really, really good information about pre-screenings and being aware. Having that cognizance of what's going on, not only when you're feeling bad, but when you're feeling good too. So is there anything that you'd like to leave us with today before we wrap up?
I just, one thing I found during my journey, there was no support system for men. I mean, absolutely nothing. There's no resources out there. Matter of fact, I was home one day recovering from a chemo treatment, and I had a little girl call me soliciting money for women with breast cancer. And I even asked her, I said, well, what are you doing for men with breast cancer? Is there any kind of programs that I could? She said, no, sir, not that I know of. So it's tough. I mean, another thing I'd like to pass along I think was important. While I was taking chemo, some of the drug manufacturers of the chemo drugs, they offered me a prescription card, which was $25 copay card. And that was all I would have had to pay to take that chemo drug. So I think that's very important to ask those questions when you go to take chemo, because cancer is a very expensive sickness, very expensive. And, I'd like to take this time publicly to thank my wife, Thomasine Osborne. She was my rock through all this. There's no way I could have made it through it without her. She would not let me go to a single doctor's appointment or a single cancer treatment by myself. She was right there by my side. And if it wasn't for her, I couldn't have made it through it.
That's amazing. What an amazing story. Jeff Osborne, story of survival, story of love between himself and his wife, and that wonderful relationship that led to, that connection keeping you here with us. And we're so glad you are, because folks need to hear these stories, and not only from, like I said, the support side of it, but also the detection side of it as well. And like Jeff said, let's please do all we can to get more awareness for men. This affects men. It really does. It may be a small number, but let's get some more awareness and some things out there for our men. And that's why I think the Pink Party's done an excellent job of having Jeff on this week to tell his story, because that's one thing we can do, is to get more awareness. So thank you so much, Jeff. We appreciate you, and we're so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.